Hi, my name is Darugo Swinyo, and I think it's time Pokemon games changed. In my previous video celebrating Eevee Day, I wasn't subtle about my disapproval of how mainline Pokemon is being handled. Rather than list off tens of grievances and expect complaints to solve the problem, I admit the first couple of drafts of this video devolved into such. I'd rather come up with what I would love to be a new standard of Pokemon games. There's quite a lot of directions to come at it from, plenty of mechanics to tweak. I'm essentially going to be drafting and conceptualizing my own dream Pokemon gameplay. For starters, get it? I want to evolve Pokemon past the turn-based system it's always been. I don't mean to say turn-based as a battle system is bad, far from it. I love what Legends Arceus did with it, and I hope if anything that future mainline games play more like it. But the mainline turn-based system is quite stale. It's mostly been unchanged since the very first games. In a similar vein to Final Fantasy, I'd want to see Pokemon move into an active battle system. But how would that look, you might be asking? Well, certainly not as dramatic a change as the aforementioned fantasies that are, in fact, final. I'm not saying character action RPG with combos and skill trees. Maybe move trees. But I'd go for something far simpler, but just as engaging. The best point of comparison would be the Tales of series, but played a bit like an MMO or MOBA, if that makes any sense. Let me elaborate. If you played a Tales of game from the GameCube or PS2 era, you probably have a good idea of what I'm going for, but let me explain. My version of Pokemon battles would take place in a closed-off arena with a decent amount of room. Enough to completely keep your distance if you want to play ranged, but not being so big as to make approaching tedious, while still allowing enough room for AoEs to feel fair against. You would be locked onto your opponent by default, but also have the option to free game if you want. Here's where the MOBA MMO part comes in. Your moves would work on cooldowns rather than PP. Haha, funny letters. This would make it nearly impossible to just spam the one strongest damaging move you have on your Pokemon, as well as bring some balance and options to your move choices. You could just get the strongest moves possible on your Pokemon and have a lot of downtime between moves, or you can keep a few weaker but faster cooldown moves to cycle between. PP has always felt like a useless mechanic anyway, practically meaningless early game while only mattering in the immediate battle late game if for some reason you plan on only using one Pokemon all battle. Cooldowns also mean that you'll never run out of a move, which never really made sense to me anyway. I suppose calling cooldowns an MMO or MOBA mechanic is a bit silly, though the camera angle I see the game playing at would give the same vibes. Movement and interactions would be more responsive though. You know, hit stun, strafing animation rather than just walking forward whenever you turn. I just don't know what else to really call it when you have cooldowns on all your major buttons. Speaking of controls, I actually have a question to pose to any and all watching this. Would you prefer to directly control a Pokemon during a battle, or have it act with some autonomy while you give it commands as a trainer? I think I can make a case for both, which is why it's hard for me to decide. Let's say this hypothetical game uses direct control. This is obviously the most familiar way one would play a game like this. It's immediately responsive and allows for more strategy in positioning and move usage. But its drawback is you can't really do double battles with it, not responsively. One of your Pokemon is going to end up being a CPU, and if you have to rely on that CPU to perform at higher levels, it's going to become frustrating. On the upside, I can see direct control leading to a more visually entertaining competitive scene. The double battle issue would be solved by straight up 2v2s, maybe 3v3s if you want to get really spicy. Like, imagine a trio running through pledges? How sick would that be? I know I just gave myself an uphill battle trying to sell trainer control, but hear me out. With trainer control, the obvious downside would be unresponsiveness. In the beginning. See, this is because the responsiveness to commands, adherence to strategies, as well as their overall performance would be directly tied to the friendship stat, or shall I call it bond. By making mechanics of combat be benefited by bond, you can create a gameplay loop of actually interacting with your Pokemon in camp or after battles, give more purpose to training or feeding your Pokemon treats, and overall give you a closer connection with your virtual magic fighting animal companion. Also, to be clear, the responsiveness of the Pokemon by default wouldn't be all that bad either. Bond will simply make them sharper and faster when it comes to their trainer inputs. A high enough bond, the Pokemon might dodge attacks on their own, so long as they're not already performing a command. Commands, including options other than just moves. This would go for both styles of gameplay, but I've always wanted there to be like dodge and block options. Self-explanatory, but dodge would potentially completely avoid a move at the risk of taking all the damage if it fails, while blocking, on the other hand, is guaranteed to reduce the damage. Speed would affect dodge efficiency, while defense and special defense would obviously affect blocking. The point of these would be to make the game feel more like a real Pokemon battle, or at least the ones you see in the anime. Every attack, it's dodge it, Pikachu! And you just don't get that in the turn-based system. Rather than leave it in the hands of RNG, I'd rather be able to actively dodge and be responsible for the success or failure. Playing battles from the trainer's perspective still retains some of that nature, of not being in full control. But the more in sync you are with your Pokemon, the more likely the dodge will work. A positive feedback for the time and care you give your Pokemon. Trainer control would also more accurately portray the complexity of double and triple battles from a single trainer's perspective. Maybe that's not a selling point to most people, but think about what it takes to lead a double battle. The Pokemon acting on their own to some degree would help uncomplicate it a bit, but you would still be managing 8 cooldowns rather than 4, all while commanding each to dodge or block when needed, assuming they're in the way of an attack at all. I think it'd be incredibly fun to play and improve that. That goes for both methods really. I enjoy the concepts behind both a lot, so again I turn to those who have stumbled upon my little video here. What do you think of VOD so far? Would you prefer a more traditional and competence testing gameplay through direct control? Or would you rather the strategy and bond between you and your Pokemon be expressed through trainer control? There's so much more to go into with the finer mechanics of either, so a rough idea of where I should move forward from based on your interest would be greatly appreciated. Personally, I enjoy the idea of trainer control the most if I had to decide on one. But don't let me sway you too much. Sound off in the comments what you think of either. Or just call me a nerd, I don't know. But you were a nerd for watching this through, so we're both nerds.